June the 27th, 1989, and we're doing an interview with Jack Mackie. I'd like to start, Jack, by asking you how you came to be in Grande Prairie.
Well, during the war, I worked for a company headquarters in Calgary, Concrete Products and Supplies. And we did mostly airport work. And the main drain out of the Grande Prairie airport collapsed. So they sent me up to replace it. 1,704 feet of 48-inch pipe, which was a quite big chore. We didn't finish it that year. We had to stay over and finish it the next year. But we liked it here, and the company moved out. They didn't think there was enough business here, so they moved out. And I quit the company and stayed and started my own business here.
And what was the name of that business?
Mackie's Concrete Works. Yeah.
And did you fall in love with the Grande Prairie area? Or
I did.
Just the work?
Yeah, I was sure tickled with the country. I loved every bit of it. Yeah.
And were you living in town then?
Yes. When you come in from the west, and the highway breaks there and goes up the hill in two different...
Yes.
Well, when you're going east, we had that chunk of property on the south side of the road, and you'll see some Siberian larch, about 40 feet high. My wife planted them when they were about that high, and that's where our house was and where we lived, yeah. And then I enjoyed every minute of it here. One of the things that I was reminded of the other day, I was at some place and they asked me about Grande Prairie, and I said, oh, population of about 2,000. One of the return boys got after me right away and phoned me. He said, I just took the census here and it's only 704 people in or 1,704 people in Grande Prairie. But it was a pretty small town then, and I used to go every morning at 8 o'clock to get the mail. And I think I knew nearly every man, woman, and child by their first name in town. I knew them all. That was part of my business to meet the public.
When you were living outside of town, were you farming then too?
No, I had a ranch.
A ranch?
Yeah. I had 1,743 acres of deeded land and 5,000 acres of lease, and I raised cattle.
That's a lot of land.
Yeah.
How did you get that cattle in here? Did you buy that locally, or?
The cattle?
Yeah.
Yes, a few locally, but I went down to Big Valley, which is 23 miles south of my home, and there was an outfit selling out there that I knew of. And I bought 2 van loads of cattle from there and brought them in. And that was my biggest start in it. And I had all kinds, but I always kept registered shorthorn bulls, because that's what my father raised at home, and I stuck with them, with registered shorthorn bulls. And after I had my heart attack and had to quit in town, my son had just finished a stint in the Navy, so he came home and he and his mother run the business until we got it sold. I stayed at the ranch all the time, except Friday night or Saturday morning. I'd come in and make the checks to pay the men off and see what was going on. But they did as good a job running as I did, or probably better. My wife, after our kids grew up, she was in the office all the time, and she knew as much about the business as I did.
How old were your children when you were out on the ranch?
Well, they were all gone from home when I went to the ranch, yeah. Yeah. Billy would be, 25, I guess, at that time. And he was married. My daughter lives in town yet, out just on the edge of town, out Richmond Avenue.
What's her name?
Deering. Her father-in-law owns the trailer park.
Oh, yes.
But they live just this side of it.
I'd just like to backtrack a bit, Jack, and ask you about your younger days, where you were born.
Well, I was born in Stettler, September the 17th, 1910. And my wife is from Big Valley, born in 1910, only September the 27th. So for 10 days of the year, I was older than her, and I was the boss those 10 days. And then I stayed on my father's farm for a year, and then I went to Alex to an abandoned homestead. We spent 3 years there. I was doing some road work with the horses, and I finally said to my wife one day, we've got two choices. We've got to quit farming, or we've got to buy a tractor. And I said, I'm not going to drive one of those stinking old tractors. So we sold out and moved to Edmonton. Marjorie was born after we'd left the farm. And in those days, times were tough, and I had the hospital paid and the doctor paid, so there was no... And Marjorie was born in Stettler. Well, then, the day that war broke out, my son was born, and we lived on the corner of 108th Avenue and 108th Street in Edmonton. So, you know, that was, what, 41 or 2, maybe even 39. I don't know when the war started, but he was born that day.
Were those hard times?
Yep.
Can you tell
I
me
worked for McCullough Storage. I went in on the 2nd day of January, and I walked the streets till the 1st of April. And McCullough Storage, I used to wind up there because I knew some of the men. And old Ed McCullough said, don't you get sick of coming here and saying there's no work? I said, that's right, I've been sick of it for 3 months. Well, he said, if you're here at 7 o'clock Monday morning, you got a job. So I was there. But I was 17th on the spare board. They had their regular crew, and then 16 men ahead of me on the spare board. Well, they all had to be out before I go out. 1 week that winter, I came home and handed Mum a check for $6. I was getting 50 cents an hour, and I'd worked 12 hours that week. Mom looked at me and said, if we could just get $25 a week, we'd be in heaven.
Yeah.
We'd be just right, yeah. But I worked for them a year, and then I went with Concrete Products and Supplies. The money was only getting 33 cents an hour, but I could work as many hours as I liked. And then I went on through, I started at the bottom, and I was foreman in Edmonton, and then they put me out on the road, and I traveled from Edmonton to Saskatoon selling pipe. They put me on the road selling pipe, and I built a plant in Lloydminster for them, a temporary plant, and then I built a permanent plant in Saskatoon for them.
How did you come to get that knowledge? Like, were you self-taught?
No, but my grandfather was a real good cement man, concrete man, I should say, and I learned from him, and I was interested in the work. I liked the work. I liked making pipe and pouring basements, and I liked that work. So all my energies were towards that. I didn't have any outside interests. I curled, and that's the only thing I did. But
it must have been a treat, too, to have money again.
yes, it was. It was a treat to have money, and a car to drive. And the boss in Calgary, Rube Haney, we were in Saskatoon, and he said, I want you to go to the university with me. So we went down, and we met an old professor of his, and he said, I know what you want. He took me down and showed me a sample of the best concrete ever made at the university, and Rube had made that by hand. So he was a good concrete man. And the manager in Edmonton was a salesman and didn't know anything about concrete, but he was a good salesman. He'd worked for Manufacturers Life for many years. But everybody thought I was crazy when I stayed here, because I could have had Red Deer or, not Saskatoon, Red Deer or Lloydminster. And this was 2,000 people. I thought it was crazy, but I liked it here, and I liked the people, and so it was no mistake, and my wife really liked it. And after we sold out at the ranch, in town and at the ranch, she used to worry me, because she was always in the bush. She loved the bush and wandering through the bush. I was scared of bears there.
She was scared of bears?
No, I was.
You were?
Yeah. And she'd take the dog with her. I said, leave that dog at home. If you see a bear, the dog will run for you.
Yeah.
For protection, that's where the bear will come. Well, this is going to be disjointed. You'll have to straighten it out. But I came home one day and she was in the house, and I could see she was excited about something. So I said, what goes on? What's the matter? Well, she said, I was out in the garden, and our garden run right up against the spruce trees. And she was down on her hands and knees, working in the garden. She came to the end of the row, and there was a rail fence there. She looked up, and there was a bear looking through at her. I said, what did you do? Well, I remembered what you told me. He said, I very quietly got to my feet, walked backwards to the gate, opened the gate as quiet as I could, and shut it, and then I ran like hell for the house. I said, where was the bear when you got the house? She said, he was up in a tree looking at me.
Wow.
Just a young bear.
And your wife, she was quite an outdoors person?
Yeah. Well, she was a city girl,
Was she?
or a Big Valley, a town girl. And when I took her out to the homestead, we had lots of fun with her.
Was there some funny stories there?
Oh, yeah. I raised quite a few pigs, and these little pigs, you've watched little pigs, cute little things.
Yeah.
She reached over the fence and picked up one, and holy mackerel, it squealed to beat the bed, and the old sow come running over there, and Mom dropped the pig. She said, they're hard. I thought they'd be soft little things. Well, then, I milked 7 cows there that first winter. And in the wintertime, you always milk after dark. And I had a little log barn. So she used to come down and sit on a stool while I milked. And I told her, you should milk. No, she'd reach out like that to touch a cow. But I said I might twist an ankle or break a leg. Anything might happen, and you'd have to milk, and we can't afford to hire help. Well, before spring, she could milk a cow faster than I could. She adopted well. Yeah.
Did she work outside of the home, or she stayed home?
No, she stayed at home. Yeah, she never worked outside.
And did she learn to do all the preserving and baking?
Yeah. Well, she pretty well knew that before she came. But we had a real good garden all the time, and we always had lots of meat. During those tough times, we never suffered. But the matinee show in Stettler at that time was 10 cents. And the first year we were married, we never went to one show. We didn't have 10 cents extra to go to a show. We never went anyplace.
So what did you do for entertainment if you have no money? What would you do to entertain yourself?
We entertained one another.
Just talk?
Just talk, play cards.
Games?
And then after we moved to Alex, there was 5 of us families, young married couples. None of us with any children. Well, the furthest one was 2.5 miles from our place. And in the wintertime, we always went to one of these places, or they came to our place. But you had to walk, because in those days, your barn was full of stock. You'd take your team someplace, and they had to stand outside, so you'd walk. And this night, we went over a big ridge down into this young couple's place, and we're coming home about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said to Mom, I said, this is the coldest weather we've seen. This is cold tonight. We got home, 62 below zero.
And you'd walk?
And we'd walked home. Well, we had a wood cook stove and a little airtight heater in the house. And I said, I'm going to bed. No, she said, I'm going to get the house warm. We'll start these fires. The tea kettle was sitting on the cook stove, and it was bulged up with
Froze?
froze solid in it. So I went to bed and went to sleep. She got the house warm, and then she filled a hot water bottle and put it at her feet and got into bed. In the morning, I woke up and the blankets were down here, and I went to pull them up, but they're froze to the wall. The hot water bottle had broke, and the blankets were froze to the wall. So
Yes, you can't even imagine
you
that.
can't imagine it anymore, no.
And you'd have to get up and start a big fire all
Yeah.
over again.
Yeah. But they were good years. We had, I was fortunate. That's what my son said to me on one occasion. He said, I don't understand how a miserable old SOB like you got as nice a woman as that.
Aw. Must have been mutual.
Yes, it was
It sounds like you had a very happy family.
we had a wonderful family life. Yeah. Shut that off. The first home we had in Edmonton, 9902 153rd Street, and that was out of the city then. And these people that we rented from had some money, and they had a big house on the north end of the block. We were on the south corner. But they gave us 2 lots for a garden, and they charged us $8 a month rent for a brand new house, 3 rooms that nobody had ever lived in. So $8 a month. And Mom had a bet with the waterman. We didn't have any, all we had was electricity. But they bet on something, I forget what it was. 2 bits. And she won it, so she got a free barrel of water. Things like that, you know, that we remember.
How would they do that? Like you say they brought water to your house, you'd have like a barrel inside your house?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
a
but
tap on it? Or
no, you dipped it out.
Oh.
You had a cover on the barrel.
Like a big barrel?
45 gallon,
Oh.
like these oil drums you see, these gas drums. But you said outside. We didn't have it outside. Or inside. We had it outside because he wouldn't carry the water into the house. And I was there one day and I said, give me those pails and I'll carry them in. No, he said, you leave that barrel out there. So we had to go and buy another barrel, and after he was gone, I'd carry the water into the house and dump it so it wouldn't freeze.
So bathing and that, you'd still have to heat that up on the stove?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And
Well-
do you have a fridge then, like when you have, no?
No.
So what would you do with your food?
You didn't buy more than you could eat in a day or two. And on the north side of the house, everybody had an apple box with a paper over it, and you put stuff that would last a day or so longer in that. Yeah. But now, after that, I was driving from McCullough, and on the corner of 108th Avenue and 108th Street, a fellow lost his wife. And it was a big house, 2 lots, beautiful house, 2-story, everything in it. So I went out to see when I could move in, when I could move her stuff in. I had to move either Saturday afternoon or Sunday because that's all the time I could get a team from McCullough. And he said, has your wife got a cook stove? I said, yeah, we have a good McClary's, wouldn't go well. He said, here's electric. He said, you can have it for $5. It was a good stove, so I said, all right, and I bought it. Now what about a washing machine? I said, I haven't got another $5. Oh, that don't matter, pay me when you get it. And I said, no, we don't buy anything we don't pay for. Well, the next month, before he got all the stuff out, Mom bought the washing machine. But in those days, if she had a special company coming and had to make pie or cake or something fancy, she wouldn't use an electric stove. You couldn't trust that. She'd fire up the old wood stove and cook her stuff in it.
Right. I guess she was used to the temperature of it.
Well, she knew how to make a fire right for in that old stove.
Would that stove heat your house too then?
Yes, but when we moved into the big house, it had a good furnace in the basement. And they had gas there. We had everything in that house. And I don't remember what we paid for rent, but I would guess it might be $25 a month. It was good. It was while we lived in the big house in Edmonton that I got promoted to foreman of the plant in Edmonton.
I see.
And then from there they put me on the road, and I went from Edmonton east to Saskatoon.
Oh,
And I built a permanent plant in Saskatoon and hired a foreman. High Green, and High Green was a brother who's got picture perfect.
Bill.
His mother and High Green, the fellow that I hired in Saskatoon, were brother and sister.
Goodness, small world.
Yeah. And then when I got that going, I came back to Edmonton, and the airport line had collapsed here, and we got the contract to replace it. And they sent me up to do it. Well, it took me, I didn't finish it the first year, I had to finish it the second year. And I made quite a few friends. I joined the Senior Chamber of Commerce. I was far younger than anybody else in there, but
How old were you?
those were the people. Well, that was in 42. I was born in 10. I'd be 32.
Oh,
Yeah.
really young.
Oh, yeah. I think that now, but I didn't then. I thought I was fully grown and fully matured. But when they moved out on the second year in 43, then I wasn't satisfied, and I came back and started my own business here. And I run it for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in 1952, a friend of mine, Hollingsworth, Rusty Hollingsworth, he came and he said, "You're looking for land?" I said, "Yeah." When I was out selling, I used to always carry a horse trailer behind the car and a horse in it. When I got done seeing people, I'd get on the horse and ride through the country trying to pick out a place. Well, he came down and he said, "I picked out a place on the Simonette River. Beautiful spot, but he said, I found a better one and a bigger one, saw the valley view. You better go down and look at it." Well, I drove as far as I could with the car and borrowed a saddle horse and rode over the hill and looked down at the flat. And I liked it, and I went back and bought it. And that was in 52. Well, and I didn't get out there till I had to quit in town. And, but we did a little fencing and a little bit of breaking and had a few head of stock out
That
there.
was raw land?
Yeah. I think there was 2.5 acres broke over across the creek.
Not much.
And we broke the rest of it. Yeah, it was a beautiful place. I hated to see it go. And we had a good time there. Family used to go out. We had lots of people come to visit us. This lady from here, she's been out 2 or 3 times. She used to come out. It was Lyle Marcy, I think.
Alice 40?
Yeah. Right then on there. I don't remember, just right then on there. And I worked there whenever I wasn't busy in town, anytime I could get out there. Well, then when I had my bad heart attack and had to quit, why, I moved out there and built a house, and we built a pretty good outfit out there. And then Mom and Billy sold the business in here, and Mom moved out there with me.
Was that a sadness for you to see that business go? No.
I liked the ranch better.
Yeah.
That's the only mistake I made, that as soon as I bought it, I should have sold out and moved out there. Yes, we like that. Had some awfully good years at the ranch. cattle prices were increasing a little most of the time. And I remember taking a load of calves to Valley View. We used to sell in there. When I come home, my wife said, how'd your cattle go? I said, real good. I said, I got pretty near $100 for some of those calves. Now they want $300 or $400 or $500 for them. But we made money there. We made a little money on the ranch. We made a little money in town, too. But my wife was the bookkeeper, and she kept everything straight and in good shape. We had no notion. We thought we'd wind up on the ranch. That'd be... Well, then I had a real bad heart attack, and...
You had 2?
3. And this last time I was paralyzed right from here right up to this shoulder.
Was that long ago you lost me?
Yeah, that was 10 years ago.
You look extremely well.
I'm all right now. I carry pills in my pocket all the time, and I have to take them. But Mom backed the pickup up to the back door and got me in it. Now, I don't know how. She phoned the hospital and phoned my daughter, and they met us halfway to town, and they put me in the hospital. And I haven't had one to amount to anything since I had a little one out there once when I was alone back in the bush. But the school van was coming down the road, and they saw me back there waving my hat, so they come and got me and took me home. So I've been lucky. But to back up a little bit, when I had my first heart attack, I was coming in from the ranch, and I had a new Chrysler automatic. And I passed out, and when I came to, I was in the ditch, and the motor was still running. And I got out and backed it up onto the road, and then I walked down the road and back and forth, and I thought I'll drive over to Ford's, and they can take me to town. Well, I felt so good when I got to Ford's that I come on in. And Dobson was out on the corner by the York Hotel. And so I stopped and told him what had happened, and he come around, he said, get over, I'm going to drive. Where are you going to the hospital? I said, I haven't got time to go to the hospital, I got to get back to work. He drove me to the hospital. And I was in there, I think, about 6 weeks. But anyway, Mom was sitting there with a foolscap in front of her, writing down all the things that I could do and I couldn't do. I couldn't have peanut butter, and I couldn't have cream, and I couldn't have fat meat, and all this junk. And
all the things you love that.
Yeah, things that I liked. And finally, he quit talking. I said, are you all done? Yep. He said, I can't think of anything else. Well, I said, what about Scotch whiskey? He said, you never drank enough Scotch to hurt you. He said, I think a drink before you go to bed would do you good, and I still do that. I have a drink before I go to bed. Seems to settle me down. But after the last one, after Mom took me to town, we knew we had to quit. But we had already sold the ranch when I had the light one before. So we had to build down on the river. And a neighbor of mine and I cut all the logs on our own place. Hauled them up to the house and had them sawed and planed. And I would guess that maybe 2/3 of that house there, Mom and I built. 24 by 55. And we did most of the building. We had lots of time.
You designed that yourself?
You
designed the house you wanted?
Well, I just kept building on the road as she wanted. There was no design. It was 24 feet by 55. And one day, I never could stand the heat, and Mom liked the heat. Well, this day at 3 o'clock, I was sitting over in the shade having a coffee, and Mom was going around and around the house, and she was 20 minutes or so, and she had a paper, and she was writing it. She said, you know, we got to have another room, but I don't know where to put it on this house. She said, it's too long now. And we had a full basement, and 24 by 55, and 2 of us living in it. Well, we didn't need any. Well, we never got around to building the other room. But to get back to the city, Bill Sharp was very strong in social credit. And he'd been in the House, and my father had been a member in the House. So we got to be very good friends. And he came down one day and he said, "You're going to run for council." I said, "No, I don't think so." "Oh, yes." So we went down Main Street and got the okay of the people on Main Street that they'd work for me, and I went in and I was there 10 years on the council.
Were you interested in politics before that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. Now I got to back up again.
Okay.
I come in from the homestead, my mother and father, and I had a Model T Ford, and I drove into the backyard and went into the kitchen. My mother said, "Sit down there, don't you go into the living room." I said, "I'll never see you again if I do." So I sat down and had coffee with her, and I could hear this commotion in the living room when they were... So finally I got up and went in, and we had what we called a Davenport in there. I don't know, you know what it's a... It's not a Chesterfield, but it opened up and made a bed. And my dad and old William Aberhart up and down the room, pounding their fists at one another, arguing to beat the band. Art and my father. And they were arguing to beat the band. And so I was sitting there, and finally Aberhart came over to me. He said, "What do you think of this, young fella?" I said, "You've got it backwards." "What do you mean? What do you mean?" "Well," I said, "you say that after a person gets 50 or 55, you look after them." I said, "That's wrong." I said, "You take these kids when they finish school or college. They're young enough to have some time. Give them all the money they want and let them go all over the world and see what's going on. And I said, after they get to be 40, why, they're no good anymore. Put them to work. Let them do the work." And he looked at me. He said, "I take it you're not 40. And I said, "No, not by quite a while." Well, I didn't see him again for quite a while, and I was in at the opening of the legislature, and he saw me, so he came over to talk. And he said, "You know, I've been thinking about what you told me." He said, "What do you think now?" Well, I said, "I have a notion now that you should not do any work till you're 50, and then after 50 go to work." Yeah, he was...
Things change.
Yeah. But we were strong social credit. That's all my wife and I ever voted was social credit, because we didn't know anything else.
And you spent 10 years in council.
10 years on council,
What
yeah.
was that like? There's got to be a few stories there.
Yes, there were some stories and some battles. And, I was interested in having a city engineer, town engineer at that time. And George Howes had been an engineer at the airport, and he'd quit. So I was Public Works, and I hired him to come in and design our drainage. When I came here, 8th Avenue was a ditch, and all the water from that end of town came down 8th Avenue and into the creek. So Woolworths. Not Woolworths. What's the...
Metropolitan?
No, the brick warehouse. That was Hudson Bay at that time.
Yeah.
And Bill Sharp had a John Deere agency across. And I come uptown one morning at 8 o'clock, and here's Bill out there with a shovel. And he was the mayor of the town. I said, "What are you doing?" Well, he said, "That silly engineer you hired is going to run the water this way." And he said, "I've been here all my life and it runs the other way." Well, I said, "What they're doing is putting in storm drainage, and this is the shortcut to the creek." And I said, "This won't have anything to do with the surface water except what's caught in the manholes, but this..." Well, he was mad. And "I don't believe in this stuff," he said. "Practical experience got it all beat." So anyway, we put it in where we wanted to. And we put a big pipe that's still in 8th Avenue underneath and opened it up. And,
So it was the right way to go.
well, yeah, but I fought council all the time I was on there. I had one pet deal that I had never got through. I wanted Grande Prairie to go south That's where our water came from, and that's our sewer disposal. But some of the council and some other people bought this land north. So they had more pull than I did, and they developed that. And then, when they started to bring the sewer from up there, and it went the other way. Well then, when they put in the storm drainage and everything from there, they had to redo it all through town. It had to go down. See, that's lower than this.
Yes.
And that's the one thing that I didn't like that happened in town. I was never very happy about that. But there was quite a few fellows made, maybe not $1 million, but $500,000 on developing that land up there. They made a lot of it.
What other changes occurred then? Do you remember?
There was an old Scotchman, Deputy Minister of Highways in Edmonton. His name will come to me after a while, but we didn't want them to run the highway down Richmond Avenue because it was too narrow. The street north was made for that. But a bunch of guys bought up Richmond Avenue and they charged, or the 101st, and they charged too much, so they moved south a block with the main street. Well, he and I spent a day together, and I told him, I said, how about going out here at the 4 Mile corner and not crossing the track? Stay on the east side of the track down through town and then come out. Well, we marked it down, and I'm not going to do it, but I got to say that you suggested it. Well, then I wanted him to move to 101st Avenue. Oh. He said, that hill out there. I said, the hill is just the same as the rest of it. You might have to buy a couple of houses. There wasn't any houses up there, didn't speak of. So after dinner, we were coming down Richmond Avenue, and he said, have you got a tape here? And I said, yeah. Well, he said, stop. So I stopped, and he said, put that over on that building on that side, and he went to the other side. Oh, he said, we can't run the highway down here. He said, do you know that this street is only 6 feet wider than 8th Avenue in Calgary? So that's where it went. But we did. I got a bridge out of him. The bridge that's on the main road west now, they had to replace. And traffic was pretty heavy. So I talked him into building another one south of that. And then we used that until the other bridge was done. Well, then we got one bridge for nothing out of that deal.
Oh, yes.
So it was...
What year was that?
Oh, God, don't ask me that.
Okay.
I can't remember. It'd be maybe 55 or 54.
So it was a very young time.
Yeah.
Still a town then.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, then, another thing. McCullough's built that big store on Richmond Avenue. And they came to the council all excited. They said, we heard you were going to pave this, and we want to know what level to put our building at. Dick Bairstow was the engineer, and he and I were sitting talking. And this guy was all excited. We want to get that building right for your pavement on Richmond Avenue. Dick got up and walked out, and he came back and he handed the fellow a shovel. He said, if you dig down through that mud on Richmond Avenue 6 or 8 inches, you'll find the concrete there. Yeah, there was lots of those. Okay. We were 200 or 300 too small to be a city, and they were stalling us on this all the time because it meant a whole new deal. So I was down at Stettler, and I come back through Wetaskiwin, and they were already a city. And they got to be a city under 4,000. So when I took that dead, they couldn't do anything but let us be a city.
What were the advantages?
Well, we had a little more autonomy. We got a little better grants. And that was one of the things was the publicity. The city of Grande Prairie instead of the town of Grande Prairie.
Prestige of it all.
The prestige of it all was what we wanted. We wanted to be a city.
And so you became a city. How did that happen? Like, what was the...
Well, everybody in town worked on it. Fred Johnson, who used to be Johnson Building Supplies, was one of the chief instigators. He wanted to bring the charter from Edmonton on a stagecoach, and this was the middle of winter. And I said, no, those horses can't stand it, we won't do it. So they took saddle horses and pack horses and brought it in. And we had a big celebration when it came in. Everybody in town worked on it. And the courthouse steps, they were a block north of Richmond Avenue. We'd had a fairly new courthouse. And we stood on the steps of that while they delivered this thing to us. 42 below zero, and me with a hat on. But they rode in with the saddle horses and delivered it to us. And the Premier, Manning in Edmonton, they rode up to the steps of the legislature, and he walked down and presented them with this charter to bring to Grande Prairie. So it was unique. It was a unique deal.
And the people of Grande Prairie came out?
Oh, man.
Yes?
Everybody in town. And it was all the celebrations you ever saw.
Oh, there was a party, yeah?
Yeah, there was parties, and there was dances, and there was suppers, and there was everything. Nobody was at home. Everybody was out. And where the co-op store is now, that was quite a lot of vacant ground around there, and that's where a lot of the stuff took place. And CFGP and Grande Prairie Herald were on the corner where Woolworths is now, on that corner.
Oh, yes.
So it was handy for the reporters and everything. No, it was a good do. Well, I had a cigar in my mouth all the time. I used to buy these cheap cigars, a package of 5, I'd buy 2 of those packages every day. And occasionally after supper, I'd have to go downtown and get another one and quit smoking. So I quit. And I never touched another one. I had a half a package of cigars in the fridge, but I just never smoked anymore. And I can't understand people going to all this high-priced stuff to quit smoking. If you make up your mind, that's all there is to it.
That's right.
You quit.
That's right.
And my son and my daughter both smoked, and Mom was always after them to quit smoking. She said, there's nothing to it. She said, I've quit 7 times. But she finally quit at the last.
In 1957 and 58, you were mayor of Grande Prairie?
Yes, and Ralph Norton was chairman of Public Works. George Dido was chairman of Waterworks. And then Art Whitlock he had something to do with public buildings and things in town. I just had that other fellow's name on the tip of my tongue. And then George Repka was sports in town. Oh man, what was that fellow's name? It'll come to me after a while. I'll go and talk about something else. But that was a really good council. Everybody did their work, and when we went to a council meeting, we'd had our committee meetings and everything before. Didn't take long to go through a meeting. We knew what was going to pass and what wasn't going to. Bert Tiemann was the other man on council. And he was with me on Pioneer Lodge, and he looked after where the arts and crafts for the children and all that stuff. and for retarded children looked after him. He was a dandy man on there. They were all good men. And I'll tell you one that's not much to it, but it's one of the things I remember during that period. We built, or the government built, a new courthouse. And the head of the RCMP and I opened it. Well, then the old courthouse, we decided to move it across the street. I think Bill Bowes owns a big building there on the corner now, corner of 100th and 101st and 99th. And we bought those two lots, and we moved the courthouse over onto that. Mayor, Bob Miller, and he was, he had to have his nose and everything. So I said to Art Whitlock, when you put up those forms, don't cut off those 2x4s. They were using 16-foot 2x4s to put in an 8-foot basement. I said, don't cut them off for a day. And the old courthouse was a 2-story building. And I said, when Miller comes over there and wants to know what's going on all about, tell him, well, we're going to run the basement up a story above ground and then put the other on top, and we'll have the first 3-story building in town. Well, Miller pretty near went wild to come down to see me about that. But there was lots of things like that. Well, Bob Miller was a good mayor, but he had notions of his own, and he was trying to do things without talking to the rest of the council, and most of the time it wouldn't pass. But he was chairman of the school board, and we were always having trouble. The school board always wanted more money, more than we figured they should have, and we were jangling about it. And he was chairman of the board, so one day I had coffee with him, and I said, why don't you run for mayor? I said, you run for mayor, and then you can get the school board all the money you want. Well, he wasn't in there very long till he come to me, and he said, that school board is ridiculous, the stuff they're asking for.
He was on the other side.
Yeah, she was on the other foot then.
How long were you in for mayor?
For mayor? 2 years. 57, 58. I wasn't, not quite full 2 years, because Miller sold out. It was Miller Longmate in the Ford Garage, and he sold out. When he left, the council appointed me. I never was elected by the citizens as mayor. When he left, the council made me mayor, because I'd been there longer than any of them and knew the ropes better than they did. But I wouldn't have missed that experience for anything. But I'd had this heart attack, and I didn't want to run again, but George Repka and so George Repka took over from me. He beat me in an election. And he did a good job of campaigning. I didn't go out. I didn't go out campaigning at all. I was not in very good shape, and I expected him to beat me, but I had to run against him, so there was some opposition. But I think George was there for 10 years as mayor, too. He was there a long time. He was... the city hall in Grande, Prairie was a ramshackle old building, not up to much, and not enough room. Had to be torn down, so we put it to a vote, plebiscite, and it was turned down. So then, I can't remember whether it was George or I that took it to the second plebiscite, and it was turned down again. 2 nights after the second plebiscite, the city hall burnt down. Now, everybody blames everybody for it, but it burnt down, and we got a new city hall.
And how did that fire start? Did they know?
No.
No.
It was Well, do you know where that second-hand store, the old church is, up the other side of the co-op?
Yes.
Well, that's just what City Hall looked like after the fire. There was nothing left.
So were there suspicions?
Well, I blame George Repka for it, and he said it wasn't me, it must have been you. Just horsing around, but somebody burned it down. I don't know who it was.
So that was an easy decision. It was
Yeah,
gone.
it was gone, and had to have a new one. Oh, I wanted to tell you one other thing. You can put this on. When I was on council, you had that on all the time, and you never told me.
No.
Okay. Now you got me all. Dick Bairstow came to me one day, and he said there's a half section of land that two widows own south of town. He said we should buy that. We can buy it for $5,000 a quarter. Well, I got all excited about it and went and looked at it, and I wanted to move the town south. I thought that'd be a beautiful place for City Hall. But I went back and I couldn't get the council to go for it. So we never did. They said people can't walk away down there to pay their taxes. I said they don't pay their taxes at City Hall anyway. They go to the bank and pay them. But we never did get that. But that's one of the things that I'd have been tickled to death if we'd have had a quarter section to put the city administration on. Everything there. It would have been starting from scratch and get a good plan of it. It would have been a good deal. I'd like to see that. But we didn't have it. And City Hall is back in the same place now as it was before, and they got to have a new one now. But things are changing. The government came in and decided to build a provincial building in Grande Prairie. And they built it. Bill Sharp was mayor, and I was chairman of Public Works. Well, you know where it is. So I went down one day, and I beat it right back to Bill. I said, you got to stop that thing. They're 6 feet out in the lane. They're cutting that lane down 6 feet. He said, we can't do that. He said, if we cut it down, we might not get a provincial building for years. And he said, 14 feet's enough for that lane. So we jangled about it, but they put it up. Now, that's a real good building. Have you ever been down in the third basement?
It is a good building.
You've been down in the third basement?
No, not in the third basement.
Well, they got a place down there for if we have an air attack or anything. The council and big dignitaries go down there. Everything is there.
Okay.
But it's a good building. But that's what I said to some of the council. Why not move City Hall into that? Oh, no, we're going to tear that down. That's too good a building to tear down. Now they're going out here to the drill hall and going to tear that down. That's too good a building.
To the
Drill hall down the south side.
armory?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Charlie Turner was the timekeeper on there, and his dad was the foreman. And that's all good treated for trusses. Ring bolts, and I don't think you know what they are, but ring bolts and bolts to hold them up.
It's well built.
Well-built building, and they've built the same thing all across Canada, none of them condemned or anything. But the trouble they did here, they covered with test inside, with plywood.
Yeah.
Now you can't tighten those bolts, and those bolts must be tightened every 2 or 3 years to keep it up. Well, on the city council, there's one member has cut a hole and went up in and looked at those trusses. He's the only fellow that's fighting he don't want it tore down. That's Sam Drader. None of the rest of them went up there, but they all think it should be tore down and spend $3 million to build another one. I don't know. Things are changing when they get old. They want to get rid of them and get a new one. One of the things that started this, when they started the big development north of the railroad track, and they decided they had to have more traffic room, so the bank already cut their building down. They bought the other bank ready to tear down, and they'll have to take the provincial building down. Well, for what traffic we have here, we've got lots of room to handle it. I don't know. was a girl who used to work in the old city hall. Very good, efficient girl. And the main office, the door open to the south. And then in behind that we had a little about 6x6 cupboard where we stored old records and paper and that kind of stuff and envelopes. And I was coming up and she was out standing at the leg of the tower behind the building and she kept motioning to me to come that way. So I went around that way and she took me in the back door into this little place, and there was only a plywood partition between it and the main office. And there was a heck of a row going on out there. And there was a lady in there getting welfare. And she said, I can only have 1 dozen eggs. Mr. Keyes said, 1 dozen eggs a week, that's all you get. He said, I know what you do. He said, you take the other or whatever extra you can get down and trade it for beer. And so he said, we're only going to give you 1 dozen. She argued about it and how she liked eggs and everything, and finally there was a dead silence. And we heard the door slam and she went out, and in come Bob Keyes. Well, she opened up this dozen eggs and she said, I can't have these, and she slammed them right in his face and took them.
Really?
He came in, he said, you should have been out there doing that. No, I can't duck like you can, but she smashed up that dozen eggs right in his face.
So nobody had any eggs?
No. Keyes was going to retire, and we were looking for a secretary, and Dick Bairstow came to me and he said, Tom Tampton proved up a homestead out north of Wanham in that Army deal, and he said he's got a university degree. He said he's a real smart fellow, but very quiet. But he said he could handle this job hands down. Well, I said, where do I find him? Well, he said, right now he's driving a cat on the Alaska Highway. So I went up the Alaska Highway and caught him, talked to him. Yeah, he said he'd come down and take the job. More money than he was making driving cat. So he came down and he was a big fella, 6'2" or 3" and weighed 225 pounds. He was always sitting in the chair like this. And everybody in town, Mr. Keyes was working all the time. And that guy just sits there and does nothing. What do you pay him for? So I went to Mr. Keyes, and he said that man can do more work in an hour than I can do in a half a day. He said he's the best I ever saw. So this day I went in, and he was sitting there like that. I said, what are you doing, Tom? He pulled up the book, City Charter, or the whole works about city, so you knew how to run a city and all the bylaws and everything. And he said, turn to any page and read the first line. I did. He was memorizing that book. Girl, he was. But he didn't last long. He took off. He didn't stay too long, but he was sure a good man.
He must have been brilliant.
He was really brilliant, yeah. But we had lots of them. Russell Burgess was the town foreman, and when I came here, he was a surveyor, and he was a surveyor just about like I am. So we were going down below the hill, and I wanted to know that the church up on top, I said, have you got the stakes, the corner of that church, so I can measure up my land? Oh, yeah, sure. He was the town foreman, and did all the surveying and laid out the lots. We went up there and he couldn't find the stake. He said, I put that in there. I know it's right about here someplace. Well, I said, a steel stake or what is it? No, he said, it's just a piece of lath. I shove a piece of lath in, well, it had rotted and was gone. And we found lots of mistakes. He'd be a foot out or a foot and a half. It didn't matter. There wasn't many people. But when the town started to develop, we had to have every foot we could get. Everything had to be right. Another thing, when I came here, Tom Weller was the city solicitor. And they lived behind us, and his kids were a little older than ours, and they used to babysit for us. He he came to me and he said, have you got a 5-gallon cream can? I said, no. Well, he said, you better buy one. He said, the city water isn't fit to drink. He said, we go down to the Wapiti, and there's a spring there. We get our water there. So I asked Mom about it. Well, she said it's not very good. So I got a cream can. He was looking out the back door, and when he saw me come with a cream can, he ran his over. He didn't have a car, and he wanted me to take him down to get his water, too.
Oh,
So we used that water from the spring down where the scout camp used to be. And there was another fellow in the north end of town. I don't remember his name, but he had a well that people would get water from, too. But the water, the city water, they said wasn't fit to drink. I don't know what was wrong with it or anything.
and is it now?
Well, I don't drink city water now. It's fluorinated, and I won't drink fluoride water. I go out, I've got a couple of gallon jugs, and I go out to the Simonette
Yeah.
and catch them. When I come home from the coast the last time, I watched this water coming down off the mountains, these little streams, and I dumped them, went filled them again there. But I was thinking about that. I'm not so sure that water running down through, I don't know what minerals or what it goes through. I don't know if it's good or not, but it tastes good, and it was cold. So I've got that now. Mrs. Massey took over the lodge after the Salvation Army left, and she did a wonderful job. She just looked after everybody, and the meals were good, and the housekeeping was good, and it was something really nice. And one of the things, the government was in a few times. They were talking about building. We didn't want the government. We wanted to run it ourselves. This was going to be ours. Well, when one of these old homesteaders or somebody come in, we found out what their income was. And we left them enough money, no matter what their income was, we left them enough money to buy a case of beer or go to a show or get a taxi home. We left them that much and took the rest. Well, then the municipalities were to pay for the rest. There was Spirit River, Heath, Beaver Lodge, Grand Prairie, and what's out east? First town across the river, east. Well, anyway, we joined in. The first year, it cost us, I think, 2 mills. The municipals had to pay to keep this going. The next year, it was down to about a mill, a little bit under a mill. And the third year, we paid our way.
Really?
They didn't have to put up a cent. But Friday night or Saturday morning, the wholesales would all call, we've got so much stuff that won't keep over the weekend. And they'd bring down, and Mrs. Massey went over it, and we had lots of stuff. Somebody would butcher, and they'd bring in a quarter of beef or a half hog. And it was really a community affair. Well, then afterwards, they tore it down, and the government, this is run by the government now. It's a government outfit. But we liked it, and we had a notion, and we made it stick. We got it through. But soon after I left as mayor and George took over, they tore the old one down and built the new one. And the government took over.
Do you think that back then there was more community spirit than there is right now?
I think there was. I think there was. Anybody that was in trouble or needed help, somebody always made it known, and we went and helped and did what we could.
Is that because most people were in the same boat?
No, there were people that no matter what they did, it didn't pan out. You've heard of people like that. You must have seen lots of them. And they had hard luck, and we would help them any way we could. Always did.
Because I've listened to some stories that a lot of pioneer people have told me, and it seems to me like it was a closer knit community.
Oh yes, very much. Yes, it was. Those were good times, and that's the reason I stayed here. I like the people here. they were interested in what I was doing, and I was interested in what they were doing. And they told me their problems, I told them mine.
And you've made a number of friends through the years.
Oh yes, over the years I have very many. But my problem is now that I can't remember names. And I see these people and I just can't put a name to them, and I feel terrible about it, but there's nothing I can do about it. I think I'll go down to Montreal and get that treatment. No, I don't know. And Bert Tiemann, who was on council with me, had as much to do with building this place and starting it as anybody. He did a lot of work here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did you know Bert?
No.
No, well, he died. Yeah, but he was a wonderful help.
He must
And
have
a good
been
man.
a very unique fellow.
Yeah.
I've heard
And
many people tell stories.
when he first came to the country, he homesteaded up north. And then he moved into town, and he did a little carpenter work, and he kept a cow and some hay. Bob Keyes went down to him. He said, "You'll have to take that cow out of town." He said, "What cow?" He'd already taken her out in the pasture early in the morning. "Well, what are you feeding that hay?" "Well, I'm using it up." "Well," he said, "you can't have a cow in town. That's against the bylaw." Keyes never did catch up with him. He kept that cow here for a couple of years and milked her all the time. And it was like in those days, she gave more milk than he could use, and he always had 2 or 3 places down the street that he'd take down a little lard pail full of milk to the people that needed it. And there was lots of that kind of stuff in
Yes.
those days. So was my wife and our kids. I was away a lot, and she raised the kids. And I think did a better job than I could have done. But Phil Lessaway, a barber in town,
Yes.
he's cut my hair ever since I came to town. And that's 45 or 6 years ago. 47 years ago. And I talked to a fella, Tetro. Do you know any Tetros?
Yeah. And Jenny.
Yeah, well, her brother-in-law had a welding shop up beside the utilities. And he did all our work for us. He was a wonderful welder. And I was having a tough time starting just like him. And if I was broke down, he'd drop everything and fix mine, and so that I could go. And I saw him up in the co-op the other day, and we visited for an hour talking about things that went on in the old days.
What do you think is the biggest change that you've seen since you came to Grande Prairie? Big question.
Yeah, the biggest change that I see is that everybody is on the run as fast as they can go. They don't pay any attention to the speed limit. And if they see an orange light, that means you hurry through. And they don't know what their next door neighbor or the fellow down the street, what he's doing. They have to worry about themselves. In our time, I knew everybody in town and what they were doing and what their problems were, and they all knew the same about me. Well, that's changed now. We're getting further away from one another. I don't know how to say it.
Maybe just that we don't seem to need each other anymore.
Well, that could be it. I don't know. But I used to walk from our place up Richmond Avenue, 2 blocks and a half block north of the post office on one side of the street. I'd go back on the other. And I would say that 9/10 of the businessmen in town I would meet and talk to that morning because they were sweeping their sidewalks off and fixing them up. Well, here's one I should tell you. We had a heck of a time about parking on Main Street. If you live in Edmonton and you park within 2 or 3 blocks of where you're going, you don't think anything of it. But if you live in Grande Prairie and you can't park right in front, that's no good. You don't like that. Well, we finally got it through council. We put parking meters on Richmond Avenue. And some of these storekeepers were pretty upset about it. They said it was going to cut their business down. They wouldn't do anything. So the morning after we put them in, I walked uptown, and Bob Waddell wasn't on the council. He'd been mayor before me, before Miller. Come uptown, and there's a car sitting in front of his place. And the meter isn't nothing in it. I said, "Is that your car, Bob?" No. He said, "It's not my car." So I go up the other end of the block, and here's Clayton Butchard. The car sitting in front of his place. I said, "Is that your car, Clayton?" No. He said, "I don't know who it is." He said, "I think it's a farmer." I finally tumbled. I said, "You know what I think? I think that's Bob Waddell's car. And your car's in front of his place." And it was. So I immediately phoned the guy. I said, "Put a ticket on each one of those cars." But they were gone before he got there. But it's what do you call it? CIBC, the bank on the corner, the new one they fixed up, and
Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce?
yeah, and they backed up 6 feet from the street or something to give more room. Well, there's a fella come in here, Jack Bird, and run a big grocery store, and a good grocery store. And he had a little one up the street, west about a half a block. A little bit of a store that it started in, but his family were wholesalers in Vancouver, and he got his stuff cheap. And he was beating everybody, and it was tough competition. He just had one thing. You paid cash for everything you got. Miles Marcy was working for me, and he went in to get a loaf of bread on his way home, and Bert said, "No, if you haven't got a dime, you can't get it." And Miles started for the door. He said, "Just a minute, young fella." He said, "I got a dime in my pocket. I'm going to lend it to you. You buy the bread, but you pay for it." Well, that's the way he operated, and he did a wonderful job.
Mm-hmm.
But there was things like that I think about them all the time. And most of them good thoughts. I have some people that I didn't like very well, and there was lots of people didn't like me very well, but on a whole, there wasn't very many people in here that I didn't have a lot of respect for. I think a lot of.
You were talking about community spirit. Would your family go out to family picnics with neighbors around?
No. We did a little bit, but mostly we took off and went out on a blind road here or a blind road there and put up the tent and stayed all night and come home. And my son, he loved all this outdoor life and everything. And my daughter would sit in the car with the door open. She wouldn't sit on the ground. She wouldn't put her feet on it if she'd get out of it. And if a gnat started to come up there, she'd start to scream. She wasn't.
So that camping wasn't meant for her?
No, well, she got over that. She got to be a camper. But Billy took to it natural.
So you explored all around Grande Prairie?
Every place, yeah. All this, well, from 3 blocks the other side of the railroad track. We used to shoot ducks down there and trap rats. It was quite a place.
You got a display to bring.
I was in the concrete business in Grande Prairie, and I didn't think it was fair for me. I didn't sell anything to the city that the other contractors could do. But I put concrete sidewalks in Beaver Lodge and Heath, Spirit River, Wanham, and High Prairie. So we had quite a lot of outside work to do. I put over 50 concrete basements in Grande Prairie, poured them.
That's a lot of cement.
Yeah.
Or is it concrete? How do you say that?
Yeah, it's concrete.
Concrete.
Yeah, cement is what you make concrete with.
Okay.
One of the best moves we made in life was to come to Grande Prairie. we have enjoyed most of the time. Had a good time. The country's been good to us, and we were happy to do anything we could to improve things here.
You had some big disaster happen to you too, didn't you?
Yes, we lost everything we had on the river.
Do you want to talk about it?
I don't even like to think about it.
No?
But my wife liked good things, and she saved to buy a table or a chair or a lamp or something. And she had an awfully fine bunch of stuff. Well, she died 2 years before the big flood. She had a heart attack and passed away. And my son came down and he was after me. Don't show any emotion or anything. I said, I'm thinking about Mom. She didn't live to see all this stuff of hers wrecked and gone. And that was the only bright spot as far as I was concerned. That was I don't know how, she wouldn't have been able to stand it to see all that stuff. And Frank Rothwell was an old-timer here, and then at one time he ran a second-hand store here, just north of the post office. And she'd been at the post office, she was going back, and she saw a table in the front window. And it was skinned up a little bit, about 4 feet square. And she said, is that for sale? Oh, yes, yeah. And he looked at her. He said, I'd have to have $10 for it. She said, all right, I'll give you $10 for it. You deliver it. Well, he said, I have another one just like it in the back. So she took the two of them for $20. Well, we were out at south of Vancouver, and they bring in boatloads of fancy furniture from the coast, or from England. And we were sitting there one afternoon, and the exact duplicate of that table sold for $700. I said, we're going to bring those up here. She said, no, you're not. That table sold for $700. And she bought it for 10, but she had lots of that stuff. And we lived in this big house that I told you about on 8th Avenue and 8th Street in Edmonton. And down in the next, 2 or 3 blocks down, or lots down, there was an Englishman who lived in a little square cottage about, maybe 30 feet square, 1 story. And he had about 6 or 7 kids. And they didn't have any.
6 minutes.
I can't. Is that I have enjoyed, my wife and I enjoyed this country very much. And the hospitality shown by the people. And the best move we ever made was to leave the South Country and come here. And I'm very happy for the honor you bestowed on me to have me say something here. You know, that's...
It's our pleasure.
Well,
Sorry the day didn't go very well.
I just am happy, and I think I'll wind up in Grande Prairie. I don't think I'll ever go anyplace else. I have a place picked up on the river, but I don't know whether I'll get it or not.